My name is Fabio Piano. I'm the provost here at NYU Abu Dhabi. And I would like to just extend my welcome to the panel here and to May, who's the moderator. I'll introduce her at the end. But I want to just give you a couple of little introductory remarks to tell you a little bit about the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute and tonight's discussion. So I think one of the things about NYU that we've done since the beginning that has been working very well is the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute, because in fact from the beginning of NYU Abu Dhabi, and before we even opened our doors, we developed this institute to enable our community, our friends, our colleagues, our partners around the region to be with us and have important discussions, important debates. And what we've done over these years is have had major research conferences, workshops, film series, exhibitions, and performances, some of which I hope you've seen. And we've hosted people like prime ministers, great artists, film directors, Nobel laureates, as well as thought leaders and great scholars like tonight's panel. Questions that we've debated at the Institute that I think you hopefully will join us if you haven't before in future events have been things as simple as the origin of the universe, the role of Abu Dhabi's museums and cultural centers, understanding the latest on diseases like autism or diabetes, and, like tonight's discussion, considering how to best contribute to an evolving global society where the diversity of human cultures and histories are not seen as much as a source of divisiveness among people, but as a source of strength. And as an educational institution, we open ourselves to study, to learn, critically review past experiences, as well as gather dogma-breaking new data towards a future in which our own students can continue to imagine how they can contribute to an ever-evolving society that is more wise than the one that we even have today. In this light, tonight's panel deals with a very important issue on gender. By taking the example of the UAE, we can see a model of a rapidly changing society in which there is a higher proportion of women achieving higher educational goals than men, but where women's contribution to the workforce appears to lag behind men's. On the face of it, this fact seems to need some explanation, and I'm eager to learn how the complexity and perhaps even the appreciation that might underlie this simple observation will be explained by tonight's discussion. This panel tonight is moderated by our faculty, May Al-Dabbagh. May is one of our eminent assistant professor at NYU Abu Dhabi. As one of NYU Abu Dhabi's pioneering faculty, May contributes extensively to NYU Abu Dhabi's mission with her commitment to our students, as well as being a top scholar in her field. She has developed a course called Women and Work in the Gulf, and her research has been widely published in top scholarly journals, as well as being picked up by media as it explores gender and globalization in the Middle East. She's currently conducting research on the intersection of family and women's work in both Saudi Arabia and the UAE, pertinent to tonight's discussion. But what's important is, of course, that her educational trajectory shows that May has continuously improved on her university choices. She first went to Harvard University, where she obtained her bachelor's degree. Then she went to the University of Oxford, where she got her PhD, and in both cases it was in psychology. And of course, at the end, she decided that these institutions prepare her pretty well for coming to NYU Abu Dhabi. Just before joining NYU Abu Dhabi, May was the founding director of the Gender and Public Policy Program at the Dubai School of Government and a research fellow at the Women and Public Policy Program at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Please join me in welcoming May and the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fabio, for such a generous introduction. It's very hard to follow that act. Although I have to say that I feel incredibly privileged to be here today, to be able to introduce to you three wonderful speakers with a variety of experiences that are going to be super relevant to our conversation. I wanted to start our panel today by asking, what do we actually know about women's work in the UAE? Well, we know a couple of things. we know that there are some very dominant discourses that try to describe how women work, why they don't work, and what choices they actually make. Women achieve or seem to be achieving relatively well in education. They start to work, increasingly so, but too slowly. They tend to leave after having children. And in general, the most dominant of those ideas is that women face cultural constraints. Research has shown that some of this may be true. In a paper co-authored by Dr. Fatima in 2011, they found that women are less likely to find employment compared to men. They're more likely than men in the UAE to take up private sector employment, and that they earn significantly less than men do. We also know that unemployment among national women is significantly higher than it is compared to national men, almost 3 times as much, especially among the highly educated. We also know that nationalization policies are at best ineffective and at worst reinforce negative stereotypes about nationals. But beyond this, there's still a lot that we have to know. There are many misconceptions about what women want and the choices that they make. And rather than taking it for granted that women don't really want to work, that they just face these cultural obstacles that hopefully will change with time, we'd like to take a fresh approach, a new kind of way of thinking about how women make decisions about what they do and what kind of genuine options do they experience. So what I'd really like to do, if there's sort of one takeaway point from our panel today, is that we'd like to move the conversation away from how to fix the women, how to change women so that they can fit into a system that has metrics that may not reflect their own experiences, to really thinking about ways of transforming the contexts in which women live, families, markets, and social policy. And through this moderated discussion, where we have some really fantastic speakers representing those 3 sectors, I hope that we can touch on some of the research which is emerging about women's work in the UAE and think about what we might do in terms of a second generation research emerging on this particular topic. So how do we move away from what we know and many of these misconceptions into new ways of thinking about women's work in the UAE and in the region? Women's career paths are certainly not linear. So this kind of analogy of a glass ceiling where women continue and then hit this thing which they don't know what to make of, maybe some discrimination in the workplace, or usually in our part of the world, the kind of cultural obstacles. We know from a lot of research in a lot of places around the world that actually women's career paths tend not to be linear. Women off-ramp and on-ramp. So they take some time off and they come back on. Women also zigzag. They move laterally between careers. And in fact, the right kind of analogy is less like an elevator that goes up and stops, but really like a labyrinth. Often you're trying to negotiate a number of difficult decisions that you have to make, even if you have a very focused idea of where you want to reach at the end. So I hope that by the end of our panel today, we can really move beyond these sort of simplistic stereotypes about choices or assumptions about preferences and really think about what are the micro mechanisms that can help women learn, develop their careers, and attain some well-being long-term. This panel is really going to be structured as a moderated discussion, a discussion among the panelists at the beginning with a set of questions that I've prepared, but also a discussion with you, the audience. We would love to hear from you. I can already see a couple of people who probably should be sitting here as well. I mean, people who have a lot of knowledge about this topic and a lot of experience working here in the UAE. So what I'm going to do is introduce the speakers and then ask a few questions to each, and then we're going to open it up for discussion in the end. So our first speaker today is Rabea Ataya, who is the founder and CEO of Bayt.com. For those of you who know Bayt.com, it's the Middle East's leading job site. This man sits on the experiences of over 18,000 professionals and about 40,000 employers based in 12 regional offices. He's founded a number of companies and has a genuine interest in fostering youth's employment across the region. He's somebody that I would say is probably a very strong proponent of women's employment and has participated in a number of events, some of which I've been involved in organizing, and a really fantastic person to share with us his experience with research on women's employment in the region. I think some of you may have gotten a copy of the report that they've recently released on the status of working women in the Middle East, which we're going to be touching on today, but also on a number of programs that help women who take time off from work to think about how they want to pursue career opportunities after they've done some, after they've taken some time off to do other things, like take care of families or follow entrepreneurial ventures. Our second speaker today, Dr. Fatima Al-Shamsi, is the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Administration at Paris Sorbonne University in Abu Dhabi. She's also the former Secretary General of the United Arab Emirates University. She has a PhD in economics from the University of Exeter and a master's in economics from the University of Baltimore in the US, as well as Cairo University. Actually, Dr. Fatima doesn't need an introduction. She's so well known, really, in this area of sort of a women's economic participation. She's served on a variety of very high-profile councils, thinking about what kind of policies are in place today in the UAE, such as nationalization policies, and whether they serve or don't serve the interests of women seeking work. She served as a consultant to the UAE National Human Resource Development and Employment Authority, and she's written a number of research papers on economic development, the role of the private sector in the development of GCC countries, and of course, the area of women's economic participation. Her CV is very long, so I've chosen sort of a select number of things to share with you today, but we're really very, very happy to have her with us here. Last but not least, we also have Anisa Al-Sharif, who is somebody who has a variety of fantastic experiences that she's going to bring to bear, hopefully, in our conversation today. She was a socioeconomic policy specialist with extensive experience in the field of public sector reform and performance management, focusing specifically on education and social service and human capital development. She holds a master's degree in international social policy from Bath University and a BA in economics from UAE University. So we have a nice presence of two people from Emirates University today. She's worked with the Dubai government for over 13 years, managing the development of the strategic plan, thinking about social development in addition to policy analysis and recommendations. More recently, Anisa has taken on the role of a social entrepreneur. And interestingly, as a mother, she has a special interest in child development and family-related issues and programs. So I hope this gives you a feel for the kind of experiences that will create the kind of conversation that we really need to have in order to look beyond what is currently being said about women's work in the region. So this is going to be a really informal discussion. I'm going to start off with Rabea, sitting at the end over here. And I'd love to start, Rabea, with asking you, you recently released the Status of Working Women in the Middle East survey. Very interesting report. You have a number of others, I mean, including fresh graduates in the MENA region, and you've been doing this for a number of years. So if you could tell us a little bit about what do we know about the challenges facing women in the UAE?
Thank you for the introduction, for having me. I guess as a starting point, if I may, a small correction. BATE sits on about 19.5 million professionals as a database, of which about half are women. And so what we're always trying to do with this database is try to reach out to this constituency to learn a bit more about what their needs and desires are. And obviously about half that population is a female population on the database. And it's important to us to understand what is it that is unique to women in the workplace in each of the geographies that we're in. Now, as I looked at this particular piece of research, there was a lot of surprises to me. And some of them were about how women measure themselves relative to men within this existing geography. And some of the stats were about how women compare themselves to women elsewhere in the world. Now, from a professional perspective, most of the women in the UAE who are in the workplace, if I look at fairness measures, when they told us about how fair they're being treated, there's sort of the inputs and the outputs. The inputs are how fair is treatment in terms of getting a job, getting trained on a job, getting mentored on the job, or getting recognized. And the majority of women in the survey felt they were being treated equal to their male colleagues when it came to these inputs. So they felt they had the same chances coming into a job and while they were doing it to their male colleagues. However, when it came to the outputs, why we work, and part of that is about pay, benefits, and promotions, women felt they were getting the short end of the stick in the majority on those fronts. So while they were given the same opportunities to get into the workplace, they weren't getting the same output from that workplace. But even more challenging than what happened in the workplace was the same challenge that both women and men face across the region, which is the vast majority of women said that their single greatest challenge is that there aren't enough jobs out there. And as you know, we are the region with the highest youth unemployment in the world, and that problem is only accelerating. So, across the board, I think there was a big fear about will there be enough jobs out there for any of us, irrespective of gender. Finally, I'll make just a small point about, again, women in the UAE relative to their women elsewhere in the region and compared to women elsewhere in the world. And what we found is that women in the UAE felt that they were being treated far better in their workplaces than women anywhere else in the GCC. And the numbers were staggeringly different. So that says a lot about this particular environment. And in spite of the feeling of unfairness when it came to pay and promotions and benefits, when we asked women how they felt they were being treated in terms of their Western female populations, they actually felt that the treatment was better than what Western women got, which was interesting. So in spite of the fact that they feel they're not being treated fairly to men in the region, they still felt that on a global basis they were faring better than women elsewhere. And so these were some of the key findings which I found were particularly interesting.
That's great. So it really seems that kind of unpacking women's experiences is very important in a way. Depending on the benchmark, your experiences are either really good or potentially really bad. And one of the striking findings that you mentioned is this notion that the outputs or the experience of women once they're in the workplace are really bad compared to the inputs, in the sense that they feel that they're not receiving the same kind of opportunities once they're actually working. And that dovetails quite nicely with a paper, Dr. Fatima, that you had written on women labor market nationalization policies and human resource development in the Arab Gulf states in 2011. And in that paper, you and your co-authors argue that nationalization policies have actually had a marginal impact on women's employment in the UAE. So based on your research, can you tell us a little bit more about the challenges that are particular to nationalization policies in women's employment?
Thank you very much, May, for the introduction, and thank you for having me here. Let me first start by saying that the female participation, especially at the GCC level, is very low in comparison to the world female participation. If we could say out of 8 to 9 million GCC female national at the working group, it's only third of them are, we could say that, holding regular professional position. The participation rate, especially in the three countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar, is range between 12% in Saudi Arabia, 28% in UAE, and 35% in Qatar, which give us, contradiction idea that women at the higher education level, they are I mean, overnumber the male, yet in the workplace they are their participation rate is very low. I think there exist two types of challenges or obstacles that prevent women from taking part in the labor force. The first one is cultural and social issues, and this is related to preventing women from maximizing their networking and development opportunity through geographical mobility within the country. The other thing is the social stigma that attached to women working in certain professional. This is what women should this is what is suitable for women, and this type of job is not suitable for them. Gender stereotyping, especially at the executive position level. Social obligations for women that will prevent her from networking with the male networking due to her responsibility with the kids and being a wife and mother. In UAE also the geographical mobility, if we can say that the higher rate of unemployment, female unemployment existed in Northern Emirates like Ras Al Khaimah and UAE, and because women, it's hard for women to move to Dubai or to Abu Dhabi. So this contribute to, or it's considered a challenge to her. There is a different type of challenges which is related to the work itself, which is related to inflexibility of working hours. Women playing two roles, being wife and a mother, yet the working hour is inflexible, that will prevent her from joining the labor market. There is also a lack of coaching and mentoring at the workplace, especially for the young women who join the workspace. There is also always a woman complaining from lack of a clear and well-defined career development plan at the workplace. There is unavailability of daycare at the workplace also. This is one of the obstacles. And I mean, from our research, we discovered that there is complaining about there is unfair sponsorship laws that existed in the country, that women can't sponsor her kids if she is married. So this will prevent her from getting the benefits that the male may get. For example, the education allowance, the insurance, or whatever allowance that might be given to her. So this is a kind of challenges or that women usually, or that make women is not happy to join the work, or they feel like discriminated against at the workplace.
Thank you for sharing some of those findings. And it's really interesting that it sounds like the two components are this sort of cultural, social realm, and then something which is much more structural and which has to do with workplace policies as well as legislation. I'd like to come back to that kind of cultural piece, talk about it a little bit more, and maybe unpack it. But I wanted to actually connect this conversation to the notion that the dominant ways of thinking about work and careers so far kind of tend to have been really siloed from other policies that are also being studied and implemented that have to do with, frankly, people's lives. Education, health, social policy. And I was wondering, Anisa, from your experience in this domain, whether you can tell us how social policies, as they're currently being planned, are integrated with employment policies, certainly with nationalization specifically, or not, and whether the challenges of working on social policies targeting Emiratis are different from when you're working with a non-national population?
Yeah, thank you, May. Now, this is very interesting. I mean, listening to all the findings and statistics, and from a policy perspective, the first thing that you need to do is to identify the real issue. Because usually when it comes to unemployment or inactivity, there are lots of misconceptions, there are lack of data. We're becoming better in data. It's much better than 10 years when we started the first strategic plan for Dubai, for example. But again, it's all about what questions do you ask and how do you ask these questions to understand the issue. I mean, it's like when you go to the doctor. If the diagnosis is wrong, you'll totally miss this person's life and you'll give them the wrong medication. And mostly when you have a medication, most of the medications, they have side effects. And you need to be aware of those side effects. And sometimes when it's a severe case, which requires a very strong medicine, you need to give other medication alongside with this medicine to deal with the side effects. And this is exactly the case when it comes to social policies. Because any intervention will have an impact. And you need to kind of project or predict this impact and be prepared to deal with it. I mean, one of my professors had a very interesting analogy when he was talking about social policy. He said, social policy is like playing crazy golf on a bouncing castle. So it's not crazy golf only where you don't have really lots of rules. It's on a bouncing castle. Any step you're making, it's changing your landscape. So when it comes to unemployment, and I really am a little bit cautious using the terminology of unemployment because sometimes it's not unemployment, it's inactivity. And if we identify the real issue, then maybe we're not addressing it right, you know? So we have this tendency when we're making policy interventions to see one issue and then just try to deal with it without looking at what is really beyond this, what's behind it, what's causing it, what's the real cause. It's not only a headache, there's something really majorly wrong going on. And maybe I shouldn't just give painkillers, I need to do something or intervene more, surgical intervention or something. And I use this analogy a lot because it's very familiar to people. It's easier than just talking about the complex situation of social policies or public policies in general. Any intervention will have an impact. And what we do, and this is a very big mistake also, that we pocket all the population that we're trying to target in one label. And we say youth or women or unemployed or inactive people, and try to design interventions to deal with this group of people. While it's not one group of people, it's many other small segments, and they're dealing with different issues, and they need different kind of motivations and interventions, and then the other mistake that we make usually, that we try to intervene in a very late stage. Most of the intervention targeting unemployment or inactivity starts either at the time where this person is entering the labor market, or at the universities when he's about to. While a really effective intervention starts from very early in childhood and preschool, in schools, at homes. It's partly about social aspects, as Dr. Fatima mentioned, but also about attitudes, expectations, exposure. What do these people want from life, and how do they go about getting it? So, yeah, to answer your question, we do tend to do social policies. That's not really policies. It's kind of interventions for a small segment that we imagine covers the whole population. And sometimes we don't think of the side effects, and we're not prepared to deal with it. And the scary part that the side effects can come as bigger issues that we will be paralyzed when we face them.
Thank you for that really honest reflection on sort of thinking about the complexity behind designing social policies, the difficulty of, in a way, identifying kind of the right kind of target group, the right definition for the problem, and also thinking about the potential unintended consequences that might come based on that intervention. But I really want to go back to that initial starting point that you mentioned, which is the notion of really understanding how we're defining the problem. How do we frame it? And I guess part of the interest that I had in putting this panel together was that most of the kind of discourse around women's work in the UAE, I would say the Gulf kind of more broadly, but certainly in the UAE, tends to kind of frame the issue of women's low participation rates as a matter of choice. You know, they're spoiled. There are some jobs in the private sector, but they prefer the public sector. It pays more, you have better benefits, and you get to work with people that are like you. I recently came across a very interesting piece of research, actually carried out here at NYU Abu Dhabi by somebody who's sort of an unofficial mentee of mine. Her name is Shamma Al-Mazrou'i. She wrote her capstone on the work aspirations of students at Zayed University, specifically female students. And she actually decomposed those typical ways in which we think about women's choices. So she asked, let's really see whether women tend to pick the public sector, supposedly over the private sector, because A, it pays more, B, there are higher benefits, C, they tend to work more with people like them, meaning they don't like to work with foreigners, or D, if there's actually something different that's actually underlying their motivation. And what she found that none of those three things really held. The main reason women tend to pick the public sector, at least at that stage, is that they feel that the work that they might be carrying out there is meaningful. It contributes to the development of their country and that they take pride in that. And so while many of these differences between private and public may be true, the underlying cause may not necessarily be the one that we attribute to these women. And so I was wondering, Dr. Fatima, what you thought about this kind of different way of framing the issue compared to the dominant ways in which women's preferences are usually measured in research about women's employment, sort of that narrows it down to things like wages or benefits. What kind of conclusions can we draw about how we need to think differently about what women want?
I think that the reason why women in UAE, they are not willing to join the private sector because the environment in the private sector is not attractive to women, as well as I mean, the complaint is from not only from national women, even from non-national and from national employee. The reason is why. First of all, women wanted to join the government because they think their contribution will be better into the government sector than into the private sector. In public sector, women, they will be given the same right, equal right as men. Yet in the private sector, there always exists a discrimination. They are not equal rights for both. They are less paid, they are less protected, the law are less enforced. In our study, when we ask the women why you don't want to join the private sector, the answer that we get that private sector are busy getting more benefit or acquiring more revenues than looking at the people or trying to to grow those people or giving them the skill that needs or invest in their skills or developing them. So this is the conception that existed, that private sector is not the right environment that will the woman can find her career path with. So that's why they prefer to go. They think that they will be more developed at the government sector. They will be their contribution to the development of the country will be more obvious there. They will be more appreciated than being at the private sector, who doesn't care about building their capacity or having them contribute to their development and these things. They only look at how much they will get, what is the benefit that they will acquire. So this is, I think, the reason why women are not. Yet the other things, to the fact that, I mean, the number of nationals in the country are quite little, so they think that the government could absorb all this women into the government sector, where the environment is much more better, the pay is more, the training and the development existed in the government more than what is available in the private sector.
Thank you. So what's really interesting about this notion of kind of career development is that even before entering work, a potential employee is looking at what their career trajectory might look like with that company or that organization. And if you don't see anybody kind of like you who's been there for 5-6 years, it's a signal that maybe this isn't the right kind of choice to make. And I was wondering...
Let me add something here. When the government and the Emiratization, they imposed the quota on the banking sector, they used to hire national in a very, I mean, they hired them without giving them any real job. They just hire them. They want to increase the number of the national and this, but are they doing real job? No, they just want to show the government that yes, the quota is implemented here. Yet our research shows that the quota system is a totally failure. It shouldn't be imposed. So they should be, the contribution of the private sector should be into development and providing the career path to the national, to the young national, instead of having them employed in this. If there is no real development strategy or building their capacity, they should not be sent to this institution or having them imposed on this sector or other sector.
So definitely this notion of sort of an affirmative action program that is imposing things on companies to the detriment not only maybe of the company from the company's perspective, but certainly for that person who is there, who might feel like he or she is not wanted and who is not getting anything out of the situation. But I think one of the things that I'd really kind of like to connect back to is this notion of workplace practices when it comes to women. And women include not only national women, but also women from a variety of backgrounds. And many of the women in the surveys carried out by Bayt.com include women who are based in the UAE, right? So not just national women. And my understanding is that some of the work that you've been doing recently has also touched on rethinking or trying to help companies think about new ways of retaining women. So the notion that we started off with at the beginning of our panel of sort of access, expectations, what do you do when you get there, is very different than what you do when you're actually there, and what companies can actually do to change the model that they work with. Not just make exceptions for women, but change the model more generally. And I was wondering, Rabea, whether you could tell us about to what degree is this kind of conversation being had in companies here in the UAE, and how does that compare to some of these initiatives that are happening elsewhere?
So we've found that, again, when we survey women in the workplace in the UAE and ask them what they want, their demands are very similar to the demands of men. They want to be paid fairly, they want to be recognized, they want to be promoted, and they want to be given fair access. And I think for the most part, again, UAE employers are doing a better job than most of the employers in the region in terms of moving up that scale to try and provide more equitable treatment of women in their workplace. Now, there's one juncture at which both sides need to think about difference in treatment, and that really comes down to motherhood versus fatherhood. And so the requirements and the demands of motherhood are very different, and require companies to assist in different ways than they would their men workers. And so we've seen a variety of different practices that different organizations have taken on that are beyond the letter of the law, and really think about what is the spirit by which one can best work towards retaining female talent. And I can't speak to all of them, but I'll speak to ours, and I think we're pretty fortunate because we are in a information industry. We as an organization are a sort of medium-sized organization. We're about 350 people. And one of the things we realized very early on is that the female talent we had in our organization was very, very valuable to us, and we did not want to part ways at the juncture of pregnancy and child raising, nor did we want to put undue duress or demands on our women workers. And so we maintained extreme flexibility when it comes to that labyrinth that you spoke about. So we have not set a maximum period of time for which a woman can leave her workplace to take care of her children. We've welcomed women back and guaranteed their job irrespective of the period of time that they've chosen to take off. So we've had people take off for the legal limits, but we just, for example, had a senior executive join us after 3 years, rejoin us after 3 years of having gone away to raise her kids. And she actually came in at a higher position than she left at because we felt the need was there. And so flexibility when it comes to motherhood has been very important, not just flexibility in letting people back into the workplace, but then in the hours they lead and the job responsibilities and the amount of travel it requires. And that's been a very open and frank conversation, and we feel it's benefited us tremendously because it's let us retain phenomenal talent who, upon returning, was so loyal to the organization and so determined to make it work that we got much better productivity out of them than we ever expected.
So that's actually really interesting because a lot of the sort of debate which is happening right now around maternity leave here in the UAE tends to really be about benchmarks, So how long is the maternity leave here compared to maternity leave in other countries? Is it long enough? Should we think about particular sectors? But this sort of jump, in a way, to kind of rethinking the concept itself, that it's not just the time period which you sort of go to the hospital, pop a baby, come back home, and just go straight back to work. It's really about thinking about how you engage people long-term in a relationship, which allows the both of you to retain some sort of semblance of a shared goal. And so this is really the kind of thing that I think would be very interesting to experiment with and see whether, for example, creating more tailor-made solutions for different people in organizations. Not all women have children, certainly not all working mothers are the same, but really sort of emphasizing that there's a long-term relationship between people who work in an organization and their goals in that organization long-term. And I'd like to just connect some of what we're hearing here from Rabea to Anisa, your experience with the kind of infrastructure that is needed to support working mothers and certainly working fathers at that early stage of childbearing. Some of the key things that we know parents really worry about are things, for example, like the education of their young children, childcare, which in the UAE, as with many other countries in the Gulf, tends to be a private affair, meaning it's a contractual relationship between you and somebody who comes to do domestic work or housework to take care of your children in your home, versus maybe options which are a lot more institutionalized and which would require a larger share of sort of public funding. Can you tell us a little bit more about that landscape?
I mean, the word that Rabea was using, flexibility, I think this is the key word, because you mentioned this, and I said this in the beginning, not everybody is the same. So when we talk about what woman needs to keep on working after having babies, the first thing people think of, like, nurseries, have more nurseries in the workplaces or wherever. But not even if you had those nurseries in every single institutions, I question how many people will use that service. As you said, it's easy to get help privately at home. Emiratis tend, and quite general, to rely on family members to take care of kids instead of putting them in institutions. So it's not exactly an easy answer. There is no easy answer. It depends on what kind of sector you are in, what kind of work. Some organization can afford to have flexible hours, some cannot. It depends on your nature of work. Technology now plays a big role in having flexibility within the working place. But then it's all about tailoring a specific solution that fits the organization within the sector that they work in, with the kind of work that they're doing, and the individual. And which level that individual in their career also have an impact on what kind of solution. They would be like a junior person with less responsibilities, sure, versus a senior member with more experience long term. So I kind of tend to shy away from saying that this is the way, sure, to
absolutely,
go about
yeah, absolutely. Let me rephrase that really quickly. So basically, my question is really about whether, at the planning stage, yeah, there is an awareness that there are different groups with different sort of levels of resources and support. So while, for example, in the UAE, maybe you can assume in some places that people have strong family support, this certainly isn't generalizable to the entire population, right? Yeah, sure. And so given that, that there might be new solutions or new ways of thinking about the kind of support that working parents might have in a place that's as diverse as the UAE. I would just love to hear a little bit about that.
As I said, there's no, like, the employment policies, it's still not aligned with everything else. We're still dealing with it as something that exists in a vacuum. Schooling policies, education policies does not take in consideration employment requirement. We're still not there yet. Things are kind of scattered, and we're suffering from the side effects of different drugs given all together. And maybe this applies more and affects more even the Emirati population, because they're here. They are a product of a schooling system that we're designing for it, and they are the subject of all the, or the product of all the other social policies that's been implemented. And then you get all the employment-related policies, which does not, are not aligned with the other policies. So it's kind of like giving contradicting messages. Mm. And if we want to talk specifically about the education policies, it's not making it easier for parents. It's not. It's very difficult now to find a good school. It consumes a lot of energy. And if you find a good school, maybe it's very distant from your work or home, and you have to drive long hours, and you have to go through a search like 2 years before your kid goes to school. And sometimes these affects families in a very hard way.
It's really interesting because the minute you started talking about how difficult it is to think about schools, I saw a number of heads nodding in the audience. So clearly this is something
we all, like anybody who has kids in this country knows the suffering. At the moment that I saw people with babies, few months old, going to schools to register them, I'm like, how crazy is this? Why do you have to worry about that?
Yeah, so what's interesting in a way about what you're saying is sometimes conditions outside of the workplace
Definitely.
that are sort of important parts of one's life can be potentially very problematic for women who are working if they are not in a way kind of organized or accessible, because it means that somebody needs to be taking care of these things long term, especially in a system where maybe there's a traditional sort of division of roles when it comes to responsibilities in the home. And so what I'd like to say actually at this juncture, before we open it up for a Q&A, is maybe hear from each of our speakers, given what's been said already, about if you were to kind of think with us about what new forms of private-public partnerships do you think are needed in the UAE today? How do we harness, in a way, some of the maybe potentially interesting experimental stuff happening in the private sector? How do we stay away from kind of very heavy top-down affirmative action type policies, which are really sort of superficial in terms of their measure of success? And how do we think about people's lives in a more holistic manner, but also collaborate with entities that are likely to affect men, women, and families? So I don't know, Dr. Fatima, if you would like to start.
I think, I mean, depending on the result of our research, what usually women complain about, that the existence of women-friendly environment at workplace. This is the most important thing that they are looking for. If the environment is not friendly, it doesn't take into account the woman needs, the childhood needs and these things, that means that the woman can't give, can't work, can't join the workforce. So this is the most important thing, that to create a friendly environment that take women, as Rabea said, that give her flexible time, maternity leave that will help her, I mean, look after her kids. Most of the interviewees that we interview, they think that we don't need a new policy. What we need is to enforce the existing policy. There is existing policy, especially in UAE, but enforcing this policy is not exist. We just create a policy. In terms of the nationalization policy, they think that nationalization policy is not sensitive to the needs of the women. So that's why it came general. It looks at the Emiratization as a whole, not only for a specific, or it look at the specific needs of the women. So I think they should be a kind of a new policy that should be enforced, the new policy. They should be the leader of the leaderships could play crucial role in being like changing the particular policy and having them look at the needs and requirement of the woman and what she needs and what should be there. So this is what we need. Private sector has to look at developing this person's, either men or women. They should build their career path and look at how they help them to grow and to become, to build their career to this institution.
Sort of creating a women-friendly work environment and rethinking some of the nationalization policies as they exist today, especially in the private sector. And I wonder, Rabea, whether you would sort of agree that this sort of strategy is something that makes sense, or are we talking about creating new kinds of environments for men and for women without necessarily calling them women-friendly?
Parents-friendly.
You know, what sort of from your perspective or from your vantage point, what kind of private-public partnerships would you see as helpful?
So from my perspective, things are changing so rapidly in terms of women's representation in the workplace in the UAE and their treatment that I feel the big challenge today is not about improving the workplace per se. I think that's going to naturally happen, and that progression, that evolution is happening at such a rapid pace. My biggest concern is, as it seems to be with the women we surveyed, are there enough opportunities there in the first place? And the big challenge ultimately is the public sector and the private sector working quickly enough to create jobs, to allow all of these young men and women to find jobs? And my biggest fear is that as more and more young people of both genders come onto the workplace, they're not going to find jobs. And regretfully, and I see this firsthand, the challenge for both men and women is that their educational systems in this region prepare them very poorly for the workplace. And so employers, in spite of the fact that, and I'll share a very also personal statistic, we compare ourselves to job sites all around the world. If you look at the leading Swiss job site or the leading job site in Switzerland, for every advertised job, they get 1 to 2 applicants. In most mainland Europe, the applicants per job is about 30. In America, it's close to 40. In Latin America, it's about 200 applicants per job. For every job advertised on BAIT, we get over 1,000 applicants. And yet, most employers complain that they're not finding the type of talent that they desire. And that has very little to do with hard skills. Most of it has to do with how universities are preparing us for the soft skills. So for me, the biggest challenge facing women is not how they're treated in the workplace. It's how do we get enough jobs for them to come into? And then once we do create these jobs, how do we adequately prepare them to perform for these jobs?
You obviously haven't had any applicants from New York University, Abu Dhabi, because those are really fantastic.
But what's surprising to me, and this is a region-wide problem, is in most of the world, by the time you leave a university, you've built up significant career experience, whether it's in high school or university. In our region, the vast majority of people, upon graduating, have never had a day of work experience. They don't know what it is like to prepare a CV, what it's like to search for a job, to apply, and they have no clue what it's like how to act in a work environment. And so I think our challenges are less about what's happening in the workplace, but what sort of precedes that and what opportunities.
So we have two very sort of conflicting viewpoints on where the crux of the problem lies. And what I'd like to do is actually just offer the floor to Anisa to tell us a little bit about, if she were to throw something out there, one kind of new way of engaging a private-public partnership, what would that be? And then I would love for the audience to ask questions on both sides and see whether we can resolve this debate.
I think what we need is more of a, let's say, public-public partnership. More coordinated policies overall. It's not like thinking of unemployment or an activity for both women and men and women. It's not something that we start thinking of when they're ready to join the labor market. It's something that we need to think of when they're still not born. How are we preparing those families? It was very interesting when we did some of the research, when I was with the Executive Council, we interviewed lots of young people, and we've asked them about their aspirations. In this region, and specifically in the UAE, this is where most of my experience has been, and I'm confident saying it, the family is the main source of kind of, let's say, guidance and information for those young people. From choosing which university they join, which specialization are they supposed to go in, and what job they should expect, they turn to their families. And if the family is not equipped to give them the sufficient guidance. I'm not going to say right or wrong because I don't want to place judgments, but sufficient some information, some guidance. I met some high schoolers who got their inspiration from TV shows. They wanted to join a certain college because they loved this soap opera, whatever it is. So it really starts very, very early from the family, from when we take which nursery you put your kid in, what they're looking at on TV, what are they interacting with when they go to the malls, and what aspirations are we giving them in this community. So more coordinated policies. It's not about private or public, because then private is very late when we talk about workplace and equipping the work. It's very late to solve anything. It really needs to be a community, a society role, and more coordinated policies from the beginning.
Great, okay, thank you. So we've actually heard towards the end that there are a variety of ways to really think about this. On the one hand, we had a perspective that it really is the work experience and the conditions themselves that are the critical factor. A different perspective is actually what really matters is that you're creating those job opportunities, and what kind of applicants are you actually getting? Are they people that can, in a way, perform if given the opportunity? But then we got some pushback on both of these with this sort of notion that in the end of the day, it's really about the family and about the kinds of meanings that people are ascribing to work in the first place. And therefore, an intervention doesn't happen just before you're applying, or in fact when you're at work, but much earlier on. So I'd love to open the floor up to questions, comments, thoughts from the audience. The only thing I'd like to ask you is to please, if you do ask a question, mention your name and whether you're affiliated with an organization. And so the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. I want to throw in another finding from Shama's capstone that I thought was really interesting. She asked the students that she surveyed about who they turn to for advice on actually how to find work or how to do this transition from school to work. You know, and it's true that, you know, most talked about their families. They also got advice from teachers, but actually all this advice that they got was useless to them. They said it was not useful information to them. And that's actually not surprising. I think in an environment like the UAE, where things are changing really fast, and there are some structures that are very stable but are not for the young people. This is not where they are sort of being, that's not where their future lies, but this is where their parents work, where their uncles work and so on, where the, you know, this is what the teachers know. So it's actually not clear to me how to best mentor young people who are now transitioning into the labor force. I would like to hear some opinions about that from the panel.
Thank you. I think we'll take 2 more questions and then offer a chance to our speakers to respond.
Hello, my name is Nicole. I think the concerns expressed seem to focus mainly on working mothers. And while there's a vital need to address this, not only in a reactive way to existing working conditions, but also in a more proactive way with early interventions, I'm concerned that we are reinforcing the stereotype by ignoring those that fall outside the category of working mothers. And I refer particularly to single women. There seems to be a new stereotype or an added stereotype that suggests that single people, both males and females, are largely free to climb the corporate ladder. Yet there remains a very small percentage of single senior managers, very few single CEOs, and even less single heads of state. So what are the considerations for this group who are outside of the stereotype?
Thanks, great question. And we have one more over here.
Yes, hello. My name is Tomasz, and I just want to introduce myself just a little bit. I am a father of 3 daughters, which are growing, and then, of course, this subject of women workforce is very interesting for me, in addition to a wife who is also active or wants to be active and was active and in between, and this going zigzag, it's very true for her. And I'm working in a private sector where we have some women working. Of course, there is domination of men, but that's a different story. And finally, I'm also a student of Sheikh Zayed University, and recently I have been part of the research paper on women workforce in UAE versus Saudi, which is supposed to be published in January for the in the business journal. So there might be some interest also for you guys once it's published. But what I wanted to say is as follows: that for example, in Sweden, or maybe one more thing, in our department we actually had 5 daughters born in 2014, and everybody makes, we have a huge productivity, and all of them are actually girls. But one of the guys is from Sweden, and he is taking half a year off as a father, and that is possible in Sweden, which is not possible in most of the countries, which is very interesting. And then also the women can do other things while the guys are actually taking care of the babies. And the second thing which I would like to tell is about nurseries in UAE, because when it comes to nurseries, I think they are useful and they are interesting and so on. And especially if you have expats which do not have families, they cannot have the families to take care of the kids and so on. I mean, nurseries is a very important part. But the thing is that here we have no regulations or no certified teachers or whatever. There are just simple people from outside being in the nursery, and I really don't like that. I mean, it's like a person from a street is taking care of my daughter, which should be a professional trained like it is in the school or high school or university. And that is something which I would like that sooner or later is addressed. Thank you very much.
So actually, just to kind of quickly respond to that one, and then I'm going to pass the floor. There are actually regulations, supposedly, that in terms of certifications...
Not sufficient.
Not sufficient. They exist. I mean, the Dubai Women's Establishment, for example, has published those. They're available online. Whether they actually apply or not is a separate issue altogether. But actually, what was really great about the series of questions that we just heard is that they address, in a way, kind of the last 3 points which we ended off from. So Hannah's question on, how do we think about mentorship, right? I mean, if the kind of idea is that young people need to be more informed, but they're not really listening to family and they're not necessarily seeking advice from teachers, then how do we think about this process? The second question from Nicole is, if by kind of really thinking about women's careers as nonlinear, following a certain kind of trajectory that is different than men, are we then reinforcing kind of stereotypical ideas about what women ought to do? They need to get married, they have to have children. And what does that mean for women who are not? Are we actually discriminating against them by using this kind of discourse to think about creating better opportunities for women at work? Finally, we have a question by the gentleman on sort of thinking about whether examples like Sweden that really take this notion of maternity leave or leave away from work, away from just a women's issue, but actually engages men as well, so that paternity leave for men is also an opportunity for workers to be spending time with their family and then coming back to work, whether that normalizes the notion that actually both men and women can think about spending time with families. So what I'd like to do is offer that up for our speakers. Feel free to address one or all of the questions, and then we'll go for a second round of questions from the audience.
Perhaps I could start with the paternity leave one. And so I'm also the father of 3 daughters, and I had no experience, obviously, when the first one came along. And I realized when my wife first delivered that I really needed to spend time with her and my newborn daughter. And I couldn't imagine going back to the office the day after my wife had given birth. And so literally on that day, I called the office. I didn't take paternity leave, but I took from my annual vacation, but I wrote into the company documents right there and then that every father would be given at least a week of paternity leave, because that's what I felt I needed at least. Now, the reality is, you pose an interesting question. If a male employee of mine came to me and said, listen, I want to take off for 6 months because I want to take care of my child in much the same way that women in the organization did, would that be okay? I've never been asked the question, but I would certainly hope that my answer would be that is okay, because it would seem that we are an organization that's all about treating people fairly, and different families have different arrangements. And I would certainly be a proponent of at least either the man or the woman staying home to take care of the child. And if I may just tackle the mentorship question very, very quickly. So I went to a decent university that, as part of our education, they had a good career center which arranged for interviews for us. However, what they didn't do was tell us how to interview. So upon graduating, they managed to, upon request, I submitted my CV and I got 5 interviews with top companies right away. And I was very excited about them. My grades were good. My university degree was great. And I figured, I'd have a great chance of getting these jobs. And I went into these interviews and I had them 5 almost back to back. And within 2 weeks, had gotten rejections from all 5. Now, I had, this was a new experience to me. When I applied to universities, I pretty much got in everywhere I applied. I wasn't sure why I was being rejected. I had good grades. I came from a good university. I went to the library then and read up every book I could on interviewing skills. Went into another 5 interviews and got job offers out of every single one of them. And so what was interesting to me was I was exactly the same person with exactly the same skills, with the exception of I learned how to play the interviewing game a bit better. And so there's a lot of education that is career specific that is important that we prepare young people for. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to get people into the workplace at as early an age as possible. And certainly co-op programs are something that I'm a very big believer in, because they give someone during their university years a real understanding of what it's like to work.
I think, the idea of giving the father also taking care of the kid is very important. This is given that the father will accept to play this role. And I don't think, most of the fathers will like to take 6-month vacation to look after their kids.
Well, it's certainly not a vacation when you're taking care of kids.
Taking care, leave the work for 6 months. I don't think most of the men will accept to do so. In terms of career development, I think it's very important to have the centers at the university level. And when I was at UAE University, we established the center, and it is very effective in building or helping the student for the conduct interviews, to write CVs, and it is very important to have such centers. And I think it is now the norm. Every university has this career center that contribute to the development of the student before they go to the workplace.
Okay, so I guess I want to address the discrimination against single women kind of point. And I think, yes, there's a lot of discrimination when it comes to any discussion regarding unemployment. There is this assumption that a woman needs to be a mother at one point, and that's what will get her out of the workplace. But surprisingly, in recent years, and I think this is available statistics on Dubai Statistics Center website, we're having more and more of single women who are not working. And I think at one point in the near future, we will have to face this and think about why aren't they working? and why aren't they going or leaving work even if they got the opportunity. So at the moment, and this is my personal belief, I think the discussion is geared toward a small segment of or a segment of the whole population, which is women. And this is what one of the things that I was referring to when I was talking about identifying the real problem and not summing all women under one umbrella. And even within the single women, you have women with high education, women with very little education, different exposure, different backgrounds, socioeconomic. It's very difficult to just say, build nurseries or give them more maternity leaves. People tried this and it didn't work. Women are still out of the labor force in big numbers. So that's my address. And I also think this issue of women in labor markets will stop existing when we stop talking about women and men in labor markets separately. So if women are allowed or have the right to take maternity leaves, then men should have the same right. And I say right, it's not a privilege, it's a right. If a man wants to take 6 months leave, the system should support him in doing so.